So Danielle and I have been talking about this case, and it's actually a case that I was familiar with from back in the 90s. And I remember when I first heard about it, it was one of the first cases, I believe, that I ever heard about where, a child was involved with killing another child. And when I saw the recent information about Eric Smith, that kind of got Danielle and our conversations kind of going about that. And they recently did a story on this on, I think it was A&E, about this case. So that's sort of how we got interested in it, right, Danielle? Were you aware of it before then?
I had heard about it, hadn't really looked into it a whole lot, but I had heard about it, and then when I saw recently, well, not too long ago, that he was being released, it really kind of prompted it to come up again and look into it a little further.
Absolutely. So this case I think is worthy of a conversation, not only just about this case and specifically, but just the thought about children who do kill other children. What is our responsibility with them? Um, what are people's thoughts about someone being released after having uh, you know murdered someone so young? And so I think there's lots of interesting questions that can come about from just looking at this case, and it certainly isn't isolated. There are other cases like this, but excuse me. But I just remember this being one of the first ones. um, so Danielle, I don't know if you want to go ahead and play the video to kind of start things off, or
Yeah, give me like 1 second and I'll get it.
sure. There is no problem with waiting on that at all. So Helen, I know that you had said you hadn't heard about the case. Is that right?
Right. I'm really sorry if there was a bit of miscommunication on my part. But I was looking forward to the room in terms of having a conversation about children who kill. And I think that's all I saw of the title when I read it. And I hadn't clocked that there was a specific case as well that you were interested in. So I'm really interested in the conversation around, should children who have killed be released? That whole question of, after serving a certain amount of time as an adult, should they be allowed back out in society? And I guess I'm really interested in the conversation and what people's thoughts and opinions are on that. In terms of the actual case, I'm going to have a quick read above and wait for Danielle to tell us a bit more as well, because I have not heard of it at all.
Absolutely. So this case actually happened back in New York, I believe, in the 90s. So that's where this all took place. And Danielle's pulling up a video so we can hear kind of the background on the case. And I actually was able to find the transcript from his last parole hearing, where it was decided that he would be released. And so it's been interesting to that, in addition to the recent program that they did that kind of also talked about some things that he had described in earlier parole hearings. And so one of the issues that came up with that is, also trying to understand, can we determine if somebody is remorseful or not by, um, how they communicate about their crimes and how they, interact with, that parole board, because that's really the only place where, there's a decision about someone's, ability to be released. So,
I think I'm
okay.
ready. Let's
All
just
right.
hope my internet acts right. So let's see.
All right.
Everybody pretty much knows everyone in Savona, a very small, close-knit rural community.
Neighbors watched in disbelief as their quiet street was turned into a crime scene. Derek Roby was beaten to death.
Autopsy reports show he died from blows to the head. State and local investigators have no suspects.
Wow, it's terrible murder like this. Everyone was saying, let's go find the drifter, whoever this adult is. And then, boom, you see this little freckle-faced, red-haired kid with glasses. That's the monster that did it? It can't be.
13-year-old Eric Smith was arraigned in village court this morning.
It was unbelievable. In the age of the defendant, obviously the age of the victim, and that lurking question, why? How?
Eric's blowing bubbles on the porch.
I never thought that he could do that. I was with him every day, all day. And that one day that everything happened, I wasn't with him.
He was known not to have any friends. He would be seen just riding his bike alone around Savona all the time by himself. He was bullied in school.
Like, we never wanted to ride the bus home because who's the next person going to mess with him? What are they going to do today? The one day that I do remember is one of the older kids took his book bag and just dumped all of his books and everything out of it, and then yelled at him and told him to pick it up.
You're a mean-looking dude, you know that?
Eric had been teased about his appearance. Derek, on the other hand, was this picture-perfect, cute, happy, athletic child.
Unfortunately, at 13, I viewed life in a very dark manner. I couldn't carry the pain and anguish that I felt anymore. I rode my bike around and I seen Derek. I can take my anger out on him.
I don't think it was premeditated. I think it was chance. Eric wanted to experience what it felt like to be in control.
Eric Smith saw Derek Roby and recognized immediately that he was going to kill him. He was premeditated.
I got him by himself and I strangled him. I hit him over the head with a rock numerous times and poured Kool-Aid on him. And I became the bully that I hated in school. I became the individual who dished out pain to someone who didn't deserve it.
When Eric told investigators that he was riding by there when the murder happened, boom, something popped. They said, wow, he was there. Maybe he saw something.
They thought that I knew who did it, or I'd seen who had done it. But the person they were looking for is me. I couldn't hold it in anymore.
Yeah, so you got to hear in Eric's words, his description of the crime. Now, he leaves a lot out of that description that was talked about in his parole hearing and in his previous parole hearing. So the way that the crime played out was that Derek was going to, not Derek, but Eric. So Eric is the young man that committed the murder, and Derek is the 4-year-old boy that he murdered. And on the morning that the murder happened, Eric was out riding his bike. He was going down to a kind of a summer camp, kind of a thing that they held a couple of days a week there in his town. And he initially is there and kind of annoying the adults that are there and not stopping doing what they were trying to get him to stop doing. And he indicates at that point that he was very irritated. So he started riding around town on his bike. And at the time that he's riding around, Derek, the little 4-year-old's mother, had allowed Derek to walk down to this camp because it was like less than a block from their house. And, it was on a dead end street. And so, again, this was back in the 90s when people were much more free to walk, children were much more free to walk around. And so she allowed him to take his lunch and to go ahead and walk down to this camp. Um, on his way to the camp, Eric sees Derek, and that's when he starts to form in his mind that he wants to hurt him. Now he claims that his initial thoughts was that he just wanted to hurt him, not that he wanted to murder him. And he decides he's going to lure Derek into some woods. So he tells him that he knows of a shortcut, and if he follows him, he can show him where the shortcut is. So he lured him into this place in the woods. And once he got him there, he claims he didn't say anything, but he just began attacking him. So he strangled Derek, and Derek didn't die immediately. And so he hit him over the head multiple times with a rock, as he said in that clip. Um, and then he realized that Derek was still not dead. And so he assaulted Derek with a stick in his eye. He tried to poke it into his body to try to get his heart to stop. And then he also sodomized him with a stick. And after that, he just left and went back to the camp. So here he's done all of this. And, well, right before he did that, though, he also stuffed a rag in Derek's mouth at one point. He also poured Kool-Aid on him, and he took his banana and rubbed it into the banana from the little boy's lunch and rubbed it into some of his wounds. So it was a pretty horrific scene that the police came upon when they found Derek's body. But right after the murder happened, Eric went back to the camp. Um, and so for about a week, he sort of knew what was going on, and he tried to kind of insert himself into the investigation. And at one point, he reveals to his family that he was the one who, in fact, murdered Derek. And then he gets with the police, and they interrogate, they interview him and all of that. And so he, goes to trial and is found guilty, and is sentenced. And he, at the age of 13, because Eric was 13 years old at this time, and he was then incarcerated. He went up for parole 10 times and was denied. And I know in one of the parole hearings, where he has to talk about this crime, um, he, they asked, I don't remember if they asked him or if he just volunteered, but it came up in his discussion that he actually, at that time, talked about enjoying actually killing Derek. And there had been some history that he had some experience with torturing and murdering animals before this point, around the age of 11. So he had some other kinds of behaviors, before that. Now, Eric describes when he was younger that he did have a learning disability. He had learning disabilities. He was held back multiple times in school. Um, he was, if you can see the picture of him at the top of the room, he was a really odd looking kid. So, he had the red hair, and he had ears that were really very different. He wore glasses, was very short and kind of thin. And so he was bullied mercilessly at school, and also by his older sister. And he alleges that he was emotionally abused by his dad before all of this happened. And in the latest parole hearing, he talked about how, when he was being bullied, he really just kind of stuffed all those feelings about what was happening to him. And he might tell his family a little bit about it, but he didn't really feel like he had a place to kind of really, reveal any of this anger that was going, on with him. And that, he does acknowledge, obviously that he took Derek's life, and that Derek didn't, deserve what he did to him. Um, Now, on the family side of things, when Eric, I'm sorry, I keep switching the names. When Eric was incarcerated, every 2 years, the family had to go to the parole hearings and basically beg for him to be kept in prison. And for them, they talk about in the latest program about this, about how difficult it was every year for them to have to relive everything that happened as a result of Derek's death. And so in February of this year, he came up for parole again. And the parole board decided at that time for him to be released. And they were able to fight in terms of him being able to be placed back in their hometown, because I think originally he wanted to go back home, but they weren't going to allow him to do that. But Derek's parents talk about, in some ways, they're glad that he was being released, because then they didn't have to go and go through this whole process every 2 years to try to, to relive everything. And they're kind of an amazing couple, because they are still together. And a lot of times, families that go through the murder of a child don't survive. And so they really are trying to just kind of, find a way to have some, it's never closure, but to have some kind of, a little bit of peace about this. So Eric rather, also in the meantime, became engaged. So there was a woman who was studying to be an attorney who started writing him letters, and she was studying the juvenile justice system in North America and South America. And so she had written to him wanting to know sort of about his experiences. And as a result of these, conversations through letters, they, started to, I guess, have feelings for one another. I guess, but he found out that she was actually involved with somebody, and so he said that he kind of broke it off because he didn't feel right about being involved with her if she was involved with someone else. Anyway, I guess at some point this woman reached out to Eric's sister on Facebook, and then his sister mentioned something about her, and they realized that Eric knew her, and then they reconnected. And I guess in 2019, he asked this woman to marry him. So allegedly, what was supposed to happen with his release is that he was going to initially live with his mom, and then he's planning on getting an apartment with his fiance, and he's living in near New York City. I can't remember where it says where he was living out, and I can't remember now. Um, and his plans are, I guess he did study becoming an evangelical minister while he was in prison. He also did a little bit of certification for some trades work. But I guess his goal is to become a minister at some point. That's an interesting kind of a thought, that he might go on and be involved in a church setting. Um, so that's kind of the background on the case. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning of the room, Danielle and I have been having some dialogue about, how we feel about the fact that he's been released, and what that means, how we feel about that. Now, realizing that Eric has had no treatment while he was incarcerated. He did a lot of programs, but he has not had therapy. His therapy, he claims, is being able to reveal his crimes honestly, in his words, to his fiance. And so he feels like that's been useful to him, and that he's gained some understanding as a result of that. But he's not been in any type of intensive therapy or treatment. And he went from, when he was initially incarcerated, he was in juvenile system, and then he was moved up to the adult system once he was older. So he's had a number of years now of being incarcerated. And so just the understanding of that, how that might impact someone so young, is kind of also something to consider, in relation to this case, and perhaps other cases. So we just thought we would have a discussion about sort of what people's thoughts are about someone who's committed a crime like this, in terms of their eventual release, whether you think that should happen. Um, the last thing that I'll say is that, how I would talk about Eric before this crime and how I would talk about him after that is different, because I think, in terms of, if we believe his self-reports, um, and other people tend to support at least some of what he said. there were some opportunities for some intervention with him that were definitely missed. In terms of his, learning issues and the fact that he was bullied and, all those kinds of things. Because that was back in the time when they didn't take bullying in the same way that they do today. So I think that there were some definite missed opportunities there before this ever happened for him to have perhaps gotten some treatment and gotten some help. So that's what I'll say at this point, and I'll kind of open it up for others to jump in on the conversation.
Thanks, Paige. That was amazing. Really appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. I'm a bit conflicted. I
Mm-hmm.
find it a very difficult topic. Just because of the confliction, really, and because I like to think that I believe that everyone deserves a second chance, that there's redemption, redemption is possible, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
etc. But then, and so part of me is kind of, goes down that line. But then the other part of me, listening to you kind of talk through the case, talk through Eric and his life a little bit more, and the fact that he's been incarcerated since he was 13 and has had no therapeutic intervention whatsoever. I just found an article, that was, and I think you mentioned it, I'm not sure, but that, when he pre-killing Derek, he was finding animals and disemboweling them and murdering animals. And if I know nothing from all the true crime rooms that I've done over the last year, it's that that's a pretty good sign that somebody's going to go on to be problematic in their adult life. It's a
Absolutely.
precursor, isn't it? And
Yes.
so the fact that this man has not had any kind of intervention, and then you go into the whole discussion of what prison it should be for and is for, and how could that change, blah 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 blah. But I guess I just have concern that this guy who I read that he was diagnosed with this explosive anger kind of disorder thing,
Right. Which
and
which he did have. It's claimed that his mother took several different kinds of medications when she was pregnant with him, and that he did have. He was, had sort of an explosive, you know, anger disorder. If you want to use that terminology. So people did see these outbursts, and those are really common with kids who have experienced some traumatic stuff, and who, have been in his circumstances. So that's not necessarily out of line, but the things that you're talking about there in terms of what he was doing with animals and all those kinds of things, we don't know if he actually had thoughts of actually killing somebody. He claims
Hi,
that he
how
didn't
are
intend to
you?
kill Eric that day, that he just wanted to hurt him,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
so
I'm not. So obviously, you're the expert on this in terms of like the mental health side. So in terms of
right.
the explosive anger thing and the precursor thing of like killing animals, and are they related? Because in my head, you kind of think, well, actually, like an explosive anger thing, like, is not luring a child off the street into a wood, killing him horrifically, going back to the
No,
murder scene,
absolutely.
all the way that carried out to me didn't.
And that's where
But
I'm
then I'm
saying
not,
that and that's where I'm saying that we missed the boat in terms of an intervention, because if he was having those explosive episodes early and they had been treated and attended to, then it might not have gone on to these other things. And that's where it's a difficult conversation, because I think about if I was to see him as a therapist before this ever happened, and where we would have gone in terms of trying to treat that, would have been completely different. But somewhere along the line, it was apparent that he was starting to make that move into much more, horrible things. And so that's where that line got crossed. And, Now we're talking about something completely different.
I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but those are the only things that I've kind of read, and all of the documentation that they have on him. Go ahead, Dr. Paige.
And they did describe that he describes that he had learning disabilities, that he was held back multiple times in school. So there was also some real social issues there, because not only what from his appearance, but also the fact that he was now an older kid with not with his age group, and all of those kinds of things. I think anytime that children are having episodes where they're having difficulty managing their emotions, and their, particularly, rage, that's something that we have to pay attention to, and we have to do what we can to try to get those things addressed. I'm not suggesting at any level that every child that has anger episodes or anything like that is going to become a serial killer. So I want to make that very clear. But it's evidence that a child is struggling and in trouble for some reason. And so we do have to pay attention to that. And we do have to, work to help them to be able to manage that and process their trauma if that's what it's related to. Sometimes those episodes can be related to other things that aren't trauma. It can be related to, other, kinds of, disabilities and things like that. So there's lots of reasons why kids can have that kind of reaction. But I think if we see that in children, we definitely have to pay attention to it, and realize that it puts that child at risk for further difficulties, whatever they are. So that's sort of how I view those anger types of things in children.
A great thing is that
Yeah, they're much more sensitive to holding kids back than they used to be, because of the social impacts of that, and because of a lot more of the laws we have around, assimilating kids with disabilities into the classroom and providing them extra support. So I know that and again, this is probably not across the board, but in my experience, if it's considered to hold a child back, they really try to consider that aspect of it before they take that action, because they know that then puts that child out of sync with the rest of kind of his or her cohort, and that can be very difficult. So I think it's better in some ways, but I can't say 100% that nobody ever there are still children that get held back, but I think that there's a little bit more of a consideration of the impact. Sometimes kids will even talk about when they're in those rage states of almost kind of losing, contact with reality for a period of time. It's like, I don't even realize how angry I've gotten. Those are the kinds of things that are real red flags for us to pay attention to, not because it necessarily signals that a child's going to become a serial killer, but it just means that this child's in trouble, that child's having some difficulty. And so, that's something that we have to attend to.
I'm going to do a quick reset. Welcome to True Crime Talks. We are here discussing children who kill. We're specifically talking about the case of Eric Smith, which we played a little video about his case, and Dr. Paige went into depth about the case. But we also really are talking about children who kill, and should they stay in jail for the rest of their life. Paige and I had this discussion, and the discussion was, was he really remorseful? I'm gonna mute you for 1 second, Dr. Paige.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, was he really remorseful, or did he learn to play the game to get out? Because previously, as Dr. Paige stated, he had said at his parole hearings that he actually enjoyed killing Derek Roby. And it's like, did he learn to play the game and get out? And so we would love for you to come up and discuss, to share your thoughts. A lot of people, a lot of the experts around him, some of them will say that, he was like a serial killer in the making. Some people don't feel like it's a waiting game to see, is he going to commit a crime again now that he's out? So we would love for you to come up, raise your hand, share your thoughts. Anybody on the stage have any comments or anything that they would like to add?
So you said
Danielle, that the experts around him have said that he's a serial killer in the making.
Well, it was like, when they have experts that talk about the case.
Oh, okay,
right.
got you.
The other thing that I'll add is with regard to that idea of remorse, and this was brought up in the program that they did on him recently, is that we don't have a way to measure remorse. There's not an assessment that we can give to someone that will say, okay, this person is 100% remorseful and this person is not. It's very, very subjective. And as Danielle was talking about, it's very easy for someone who's trying to gain parole to figure out sort of, what do I need to tell, the parole board, so that I can, I've got there we go. What do I need to tell the parole board so that I can get out this crime, that could be also related to his future behavior. And if that puts other people at risk, not only just for murder, but for, other types of, sexual crimes, especially someone who's never been out, never dated, never, had, relationships other than, while he was incarcerated. Here's a man that's coming out into the world with all kinds of, types of, material and things that he can be exposed to, people, and he has no skills in being able to develop relationships. And so for me, that also, I think, is a real serious consideration, in terms of his ability to function out in the world.
Yeah, I was thinking, they stated that he had this rage that would all of a sudden bubble up, and he would explode. But did that go away? No one has addressed that, and said, oh, he no longer has this issue anymore. So he could very well still have this rage that is built up inside of him, and we won't know because he didn't receive any treatment, which is not like Jenny said, she's surprised. It doesn't surprise me, that our prison system does not treat prisoners, but it does surprise me that they don't treat children that committed these type of crimes. That does surprise me.
The mental health services are just not there, or they aren't taken seriously, or even within the school system, sometimes the school doesn't respond in an effective way. So, I think that, we have to be very careful with that. But I think, like Danielle was saying, I think in those cases where it's very obvious that the parents have just really not stepped up and done what they needed to do, and they were aware that their child, was having issues, and it's, had reached a certain point where, now it's starting to affect other people and that kind of thing. Then I think that there's a different level of responsibility at that point than there is in those other types of situations. So I agree with you, Danielle, that it's really kind of nuanced. You have to go kind of case by case, and not make, just kind of blanket statements about all parents. But, that is something that's out there, that, that's another reason why they're not receiving that treatment, even if it's something that they were supposed to receive as a part of their incarceration, which isn't always the case. Like in this case, there was no mandate for him to go through any type of treatment such as that. So,
yeah, and when you spoke about like the sexual abuse, now his stepfather, who was in the house at the time that this happened, he admitted to sexually molesting Eric's older sister twice. But there has, like you said, there has nothing to come out to say that anything had happened to Eric himself. So I did want to point that it was something going on in the house, but maybe not necessarily to Eric himself, or possibly.
or that the dad was sort of aware of some things, and tried to cover some things up. And like I said, they actively, I mean, their social media, um, where they're showing the mom's at the range with him and they're shooting, and she says, look at my baby's Christmas present, kind of a thing. So they were definitely supportive of him having access to a firearm, and was encouraging his use of it. And they actually, when they got called to the school, what had happened, that also relates to that, Danielle, is that he was caught in class looking at ammo online on his phone. And so the teacher, I guess, sent him down to the office, and I guess he messaged his mom about it or something like that. And his mom messaged back and said, well, next time, just don't get caught.
Yeah. I don't know if you were done, Paige, but that case in that one where they actually got charged, I definitely agree with that. I know it's very hard sometimes with getting the mental health that they need. Sometimes when you try to go there, depending on services, because I had some issues with that with my own family members and getting them the care that they need. But in this situation with the parents and then the school, um, I just feel like they could have done more in that situation.
Well, in his situation too, he was making drawings, very violent drawings, and he had actually killed a bird not too long before this had happened. And I believe his parents were aware of the bird, if I remember right. Um, so there was also other signs than just just some of those initial things.
Older. So that was just a few of my thoughts I wanted to get off. But I'm kind of torn like Helen between, whether he should be out or shouldn't be out. And I think because they never did any evaluations, it's so hard to be able to say. It's like a gamble.
Well, and another question that gets thrown, and this has come up even recently in the Ethan Crumbley case, which was that teenager that murdered all those students at that school in Michigan, and right now his parents are in jail, and they're going to be going up for trial along with him, not with him, but in addition to him. And so there's been also a discussion too at is there a responsibility of the parents in terms of not taking action, not responding effectively, or not getting help, not getting treatment? Are they liable? Are they liable in any kind of a way in this situation? Because in the case I was just referring to, his parents were actually called down to the school, and the school actually told his parents he needed to go for counseling, and they did not do it, and they made guns accessible to him, and were encouraging him to use them. And so there's been a lot of discussion about what is their liability, what is their responsibility or culpability with regard to the crimes of their children. So that's also something that's been thrown into the mix. I'd be interested to hear what people's thoughts are on that.
Oh, that's very interesting, Dr. Page. Yes, I totally agree. I think at the point where parents have been notified or they are aware that their child has that something is wrong, and they haven't gotten them the treatment, and they make guns accessible, and even in Eric's case where his parents or didn't do anything, they didn't get him treated. Yep, I think they should be held accountable, and then maybe more parents would make sure their children get treated. Now, if the parents didn't know something that just happened, I think not so much. But I would love to hear other people's thoughts. Helen, Jenny, Tanya.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I think if you have brought your child up as, well, I say well, you've not abused them, you've not neglected them, if you've been made aware of issues, that you have done all that you can to support them in that. I think about some of the stories and I don't cry very often, full stop, let alone at TV. But one of the only true crime documentary, this makes me sound really awful. But the only documentary series that I've ever cried at is Evil Lives Here. And there's 2 episodes, and I can't remember exactly which ones they are now, but there were 2 episodes of that series that had me bawling my eyes out, particularly because they look at these crimes from such a personal viewpoint. So it might be from the mother of the murderer's viewpoint, or and actually, when you've got a parent who has done every single thing that they can do to help their child, but their child still goes and shoots up a school or goes and murders a kid, or yeah, I can't blame them. I was brought up in the same way as my brother, we're only a few years apart. My brother, not for murder, but my brother has a criminal record. I don't. He's doing really well now, but he's had substance misuse issues over the years. I can't blame my mum for his issues, because we were brought up in the same way, and for whatever reason, my brother's path took a bit of a different one to mine. And so I don't want to go down a whole, like, what's the word, general, parents should be to blame. Equally, I do think that some parents should be held responsible, that if they have deliberately not done something, or have not supported their children when they knew that they needed support, or they knew that they needed help, etc., then they do have a role to play. I mean, I'm not going to say that they are completely responsible, but I think they have a part to play. That's just my viewpoint. And I was going to say something else about something else, but I've forgotten it, so I might come back in a bit. Jenny, Danielle, Tonya, anybody else? If you're in the audience, by the way, and you want to join us on stage, do feel free to put your hand up, or do feel free to comment in the chat if you are not able to join us on stage. There's a few people chatting on the room chat as well.
Right. Something, then they take him from a mall.
Yeah. So he was in a mall with his mum. She was doing the shopping. I think she'd gone into a butcher's or something. And she literally, eyes off him in, momentarily, just seconds, and he'd kind of drifted away, and then was abducted and lured. I mean, they walked with him, for quite a long distance to take him down onto some train tracks where they killed him.
Wasn't it on? Didn't they capture that on camera?
They captured some of it, yeah. So
yeah.
They were found on CCTV. I think they found him being led away in the actual mall as well, and then various sort of spots, because it's 4 kilometers if you're km, or 2.5 miles, which is quite a distance for 10-year-olds and a 2-year-old to walk. But sadly, there were moments where somebody came forwards to say that they'd actually seen them, but they just thought it was two brothers, walking with a stroppy kid. Do you know what I mean? No, it didn't occur to anybody passing by these 2 10-year-olds walking with a toddler that actually, that shouldn't be happening. Whereas I think now, I'd like to think now that people would question it a bit more, because I mean, this is going back to 1993, so 20, nearly 20 years ago. But the reason why so I put the link up if you want to find out a little bit more, but the reason why I wanted to just mention this is that one of the guys who was released, so they were both released eventually, both of the murderers were released, and one of them, and I'm just trying to find out which one it is, I think it's Venables, John Venables. He it is Venables. So he, okay, sorry. So they were sentenced to prison and remained in custody until parole board decision in 2001 recommended their release on lifelong license when they were 18. So this was very controversial because they were 18, so they were released. Venables was then sent to prison in 2010 for breaching his license. He was then released again in 2013, and then in 2017 he was sent to prison again because he was convicted of possessing child abuse images on his computer, and I believe that he's in prison at this point for that. So I it really, that's why, you know, I think that's why I'm so conflicted on this, because I just, you know, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because oh yeah, it's really difficult. But I just wanted to bring that up as a case, sort of like a UK case where, you know, children killed a child and they've been released, and you know, one of them has kind of continued to kind of end up on the wrong side of the law, including, and when I say the wrong side of the law, but he's continuing in terms of, you know, possessing child abuse images. And you know, they, from what I remember, and I'm not gonna Google into it, but from what I remember, they were like the most serious. We have, it's in categories here, and they were like, you know, of the most serious category, and yeah, I just think, you know what, I feel like he should have the keys thrown away now. Like, I don't believe that that man should be allowed out, at all. And yet Robert, the other one, he's they got given new identities and he's disappeared off the face of the earth, you know, which is as it should, you know. I guess if you know, he's been released, he did his time, you know, he got given a new identity, and you know, that's it. We've never heard about him again. But the other one, you know, I think that now he's shown that he's, you know, possessing child abuse images. I think the key should be locked away. The key should be locked away. He should be locked away and the key thrown away.
Well, and it's scary that to be released after doing something like that and you get a whole new identity. It's scary too, because now, you know, it's not like people are going to necessarily know who he is. You know, they're not going to know who he is, and he can, you know, a lot of times, you know, individuals that engage in abusive behavior with kids, you know, they never do it, they never do get caught, or they never are, you know, made aware of by law enforcement.
So we just had a case here in Sweden, I mean, like within the last couple of weeks, where a kid brought, I think it was an axe. There was, it wasn't during school hours, but it was after school hours, and I think it was like 6, 7 o'clock at night, and the school was open and most of the teachers were there for some reason. I don't remember why, but uh, so this kid walks into the school and kills 2 teachers, and the entire country is in uproar. And he has admitted, and they didn't see any signs, like any signs of violence. And well, actually, there are conflicting reports. Some say that there were signs of violence, that he was talking about committing, doing something violent, and others say that, oh no, he was like a model citizen, perfect little child, always sat straight in the chair and didn't say boo, kind of thing. So you get both sides. And I'm going to be following that case to see what his sentence looks like, because he's not 18. I think he was either 16 or 17. And he brutally killed 2 teachers with an axe. And I know that he didn't kill a child, but he could have just as easily turned on one of his classmates. And I don't really know, because this is not, it doesn't happen very often, thank goodness. And it's going to be interesting to see if he's going to be tried as an adult or if he's going to be tried as a child, because he is underage. But I'll keep you guys posted. And the fact that the school didn't flag him as a troublesome child or any, most people just thought that he was a quiet kid and didn't make a whole lot of noise, and all of a sudden he does this. And the teachers didn't really, well, they're dead, so they're not. But other teachers it didn't appear that there was a conflict. Um, so yeah, I'm conflicted when it comes to these kids that are are murdering, and I'm getting the red bar. Well, thank you.
Well, and what I would add too, you mentioned about, you know, the quiet ones, you know, in the work that I have done with kids, and I've worked with kids that were in the system and all kinds of stuff. I always worried a lot more about those kids that were quiet than the ones that were, you know, on everybody's radar, because, you know, those are the ones that sometimes end up, doing things you would never imagine because, you just think that they're doing so well. So I think we have to pay attention to those quiet kids too.
There was when I was looking into this case. Oh, I know what it was. I wanted to ask you, Dr. Paige, when you were looking into the transcript from the parole hearing, was there anything that stood out or that was shocking or interesting regarding the transcript from the parole hearing?
Um, no, I mean, other than, again, I thought it was really odd his justification for what his thinking was about what he had done to Derek with the stick. And so that was something that was kind of shocking to me. Um,
What was his
Also,
justification, Paige?
so he and again, I don't know how graphic to get with this, but he actually sodomized Derek with a stick. And before he did that, he tried to he claimed that Derek's heart was still beating, and he was trying to get his heart to stop beating. So he first of all thought about and tried to put the stick in his eye, and that it wouldn't go in, he said. So then he tried to pierce his heart, or his chest with the stick, and that didn't work. And then that's when he sodomized him. And the thought was is that if he did that, then Derek wouldn't be able to tell what had happened to him. It was just a really odd thinking process. Of course, it was a 13-year-old, but it was just a really odd thought process about, that was the only reason he could say why he had actually done that. And that whole idea of, pouring Kool-Aid on him and, taking bananas and putting it in his wound and just really odd things that he did after, um, you know, after he had murdered him.
Sorry,
So
I
that
keep
was
asking
interesting.
questions, Paige, but you said the Kool-Aid I knew about, but the bananas?
Yeah, he had taken the banana out of Derek's lunch sack. He actually took a paper towel and shoved it in his mouth, and then he took a banana and he rubbed the banana into some of his wounds, and then he doused him with Kool-Aid. Um,
Jesus. I knew the
so
Kool-Aid bit, but not the food bit.
Right. So, I mean, this child was essentially tortured. I mean, for all intents and purposes. And, it sounds like his head injuries were probably such that he was probably not aware of a lot of what was done to him, hopefully. But there was some just very bizarre. And if I remember too, I think he did something with his shoes. Do you remember that, Danielle? Didn't they
Yeah,
say he had taken his shoes off and placed his shoes like at the
yeah,
ends of his arms or something? Or
yeah. They said
it was
that he staged the body.
yeah, he did because he went
Hmm.
and put the body over on a pile of rocks or something. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, there were some really really bizarre types of behaviors that were happening. It wasn't and to just think about this, guys. This was a 13-year-old who strangled a little boy. You know how we've always talked in these rooms about how long it takes to strangle someone. That was not a quick death. And so I think that is sort of shocking to me. He talked about wanting Derek's parents to forgive him, which I guess isn't completely shocking, but just the thought that he would even think they would ever be at a point to do that, was kind of shocking. And how he tried to kind of minimize some of the things that he had done. Um, when he didn't go into all the detail that I did, for example, of hey, I really did all of these things. So those were some things I can think of. And then in that previous parole hearing, that's when he actually enjoyed killing Derek, and that was a very early parole hearing. I don't remember which one. I don't know that it said which one it was, but it was quite a bit earlier than one I had the transcript for. And so that wasn't mentioned in this last parole hearing, obviously. And so Danielle and I were talking about, well, he kind of learned, and I'm sure his fiance, being an attorney, said, hey, you probably don't want to say that because that's not going to help you in terms of trying to get out. So those are a couple things I could think of.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when you were talking about, in terms of the weird process thinking of what he did, with the stick in terms of, trying to get his heart to stop. Like, would that be a feasible explanation if you take a few years off his developmental age, if he does have learning disability? I mean, I have no idea about, developmental processing that goes on, but would that be, oh, actually, if I stick this through his eyes or through any space that I can, that might get to his heart and stop it? Is that, but then when you carry, so what I was going to say while you were talking about that, I was like, well, is that a possibility? But then you go on to talk about the talk, this, the bananas and the Kool-Aid, and you go, and the staging of the crime. Well, there was a clear element of knowing what he was doing there, like in terms of kind of like not premeditated, but just thought out a bit, wasn't it? Like, it wasn't like a
Yeah, it's kind of
13-year-old.
ritualistic.
Right, it's not like a 13-year-old thinking as a toddler going, oh, do you know what, if I just stab this a few times it'll stop his heart. Actually, there was some real intelligent kind of thinking there in terms of staging a body, and like, yeah, it blows my mind, to be honest. This whole case, like, blows my mind.
Yeah, and the way the police described it is though he enjoyed it. They made it like he played with this body for a while of this child, and the way they described it is like, what was wrong with this kid?
Well, and going back to what you were saying, Helen, theoretically that is possible. Developmentally, he was operating on a different kind of a level. But then, you kind of look at some of the other things, and that sort of is in contrast with that. And so without knowing him in depth, I really can't answer that really clearly. But that would be something that you would want to consider if you were assessing him, is how much that related to. I'd be interested to know kind of what his fantasy life was, because we know that often these kids will talk about. I know I've done rooms on other. Like I did one on Carrie Stainer, and he had talked about the fact that he had, had fantasies of killing people, women very young. And so I would be interested to know what Eric's fantasy life was, and if he had already started to think about murdering people, or any of those kinds of things. And I think that probably would have given us some idea about some of those, his thought process as well.
Right, I'm glad that you just brought that up, because Daisy posted in the chat comments about, fantasy, curiosity, etc., whether that's, something that could have played a part.
Welcome to the stage, Elixir. You have a question or a comment you'd like to share?
Thank you guys for having me in the room. I've just been trying to read everything that's been pinned up and get to know it. And my biggest question is that, do you think that maybe trauma from some of the stuff that he had to deal with as a child played into it? Because I saw a young girl where I used to live in England, in Crowley, and she was actually 14, and she ended up murdering somebody as well. But prior to that, she seemed like a very nice girl, but she held a lot of trauma. And that's what I felt like led to that. But do you think that could be the case with this?
Yeah, that's sort of the $1 million question. Is that we don't really know, because he's not very forthcoming, other than the bullying by his family, and and other people he went to school with. Um, and again, children who are traumatized can act out in angry and sometimes violent ways. But I also wouldn't suggest, obviously, that everybody who's been through trauma, is going to harm people or murder people either. But certainly, if I was assessing him, I would want to know about that and consider that in terms of, his behaviors and what led him to, do the things that he did. Because he definitely, had talked about, holding a lot of things inside and not being able to really communicate that, very well. But but on the other side of that, he also had moved into kind of a new realm with some of these behaviors as well that are not typical of what we see with kids with trauma. And so, you know, like I said, at this point, he has kind of moved away from some of those. Whereas, before, certainly that could have been, something he was struggling with. But, then he moved into some of these other things now. And, um, so that may not explain everything. The fact that he might have experienced some trauma. So that's the best I can say without, again, knowing his case in extreme depth.
I also want to point out that, his family kind of stood by his side throughout this. His grandparents, his grandfather in particularly, helped, at least based on the documentary, helped clean away in that area, that town where they lived in, so that they can build a memorial for Derek. So Eric's grandfather cleaned out a field so that they can build a memorial for Derek. And he has a little statue. Let me see if I can find it so I can pin it.
Yeah, because Derek was a very good t-ball player, or what do they call that? Not t-ball, but can't think of the name. But anyway, he was very, very athletic, and so they cleared out that area where his body was found and created a kind of a baseball complex, little league complex, and they enacted a statue of him. And as Danielle was saying, Eric's grandfather was the one who helped to clear the area, and helped with them getting that built.
I have a question. I have another question, if you guys don't mind me asking.
Go for it.
Do you think that when people commit horrible crimes, there is a possibility that they could actually come back from it and be better for society and be better for themselves? Or do you think that when certain crimes, like to this extent, there'll be more of harm to society? Because that's a question that I always wrestle with in my head. And obviously, I always like to think the best of people, but it's something that I've just always wondered, and I would like to know how other people think. She was lovely, but she had a lot of issues, and she ended up murdering her stepdad. I can't exactly say her name because legally in the UK, I'm not allowed to until she's 18. But I remember one of the things that she said before she committed that crime was, "Why are you trying to talk to me? Why are you trying to help me reason? I could turn around and hurt you." And I said to her, "I'm not afraid of you, but I feel like you're afraid of yourself." But from her even just saying that, I knew that even before because she committed that crime a week later, but before she committed that crime, I could already tell that she needed help with her mental health. And I think it's very important that whether it's before or after, especially after prison, because a lot of things happen in prison that goes unguarded. And I feel like that extra help when people come out is very important, because not only are you helping them create a safer place for all of us once they're out, but you're helping them create a safer place for themselves, and a place whereby they can actually reform their lives. But without that help, it's not always guaranteed that the time they served is just going to change them just like that.
Welcome to the stage, Lindsay. You have a comment or a statement you'd like to make?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I just wanted to make the quick comment of just basically saying thank you for holding this room, because I really feel like that the more that these kinds of things are talked about, brought out into the open, the more that just these kinds of conversations are had, the better, that we can try and figure each other out, figure ourselves out, and just have that open dialogue. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that, and I really appreciate this room. And I've really appreciated hearing all the different takes and different opinions, and just hearing everyone's different take on everything. And just want to say thank you.
Thank you for that, Lindsay. I think that's one of the reasons that we hold these type of rooms with different discussions to, you know, to hear other people's opinions. Sometimes our opinions get swayed. We get other viewpoints and it make us think different. So I think it's very important. I guess our next step is to figure out how do we make sure that these kids are getting the treatment if they are going into the prison system that they need before they get out. That's something that we have to look into. So that we can be a part of that change that is needed.
Yes, for sure. And I think that having conversations like this, I think, is a step towards hopefully that being the case. Because, to get these kids the help that they need would just be so valuable for everybody.
Totally agree. Anyone else on the stage? All right. Well, Dr. Paige, you want to say anything before we go again?
No, I just, as Lindsay and others have mentioned, I think these conversations are very necessary just to raise that awareness, but also to be mindful about, what it requires for someone to be able to, reintegrate back into society and, determining where those opportunities should be given and where they should be denied.
True. I thank everyone for joining us. We will be having more of these discussions on Saturdays. I have to get our team together so that we can bring more of these Saturday discussions for you. I think if you click on the greenhouse, you can see what we currently have scheduled. I don't know what we have next coming up. Oh, tomorrow we will be having just a true crime general discussion about what cases you're following. It's just a conversation to talk about what we're listening to, watching, things like that. So if you want to join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, please ring the bell on the club. And if you have any topics that you would like to discuss in the future, please either hit me or any of the mods in the back channel or on Instagram, and we would love to bring those conversations to the club. So thank you all in the audience and on the stage, and have a wonderful, what is this, Saturday? Oh, have a wonderful Saturday. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Danielle.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.